Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where something as ordinary as using a bathroom could become one of the most uncomfortable, embarrassing, and surprisingly dangerous moments of your entire day. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy slow historical journeys like this one. Now, dim the lights, relax, and let's quietly step into the distant past. Imagine waking before sunrise, nearly 2,000 years ago. The first rays of light creep across the rooftops of an ancient city, while merchants slowly prepare their stalls and farmers guide donkeys through dusty streets. Long before breakfast is served or business begins, there is one problem every person must solve. Rich or poor, soldier or priest, child or emperor, every human body follows the same rules. Nature calls. Yet in the ancient world, answering that call was nothing like walking into a modern bathroom. Our journey begins in the bustling streets of ancient Rome, a civilization celebrated for magnificent roads, towering aqueducts, marble temples, and extraordinary engineering. Visitors today often admire Roman architecture without realizing that some of the empire's most remarkable engineering projects were hidden beneath their feet. Under the crowded streets flowed an enormous network of drains and sewers designed to carry away waste from one of history's largest cities. For many Romans, private bathrooms simply did not exist. Wealthy citizens sometimes had small toilets connected to drainage channels inside their homes, but the overwhelming majority relied on public latrines. These were not tiny rooms designed for privacy. Instead, they were surprisingly social places. Imagine entering a long stone building where rows of carefully carved marble seats line the walls. Each seat has a rounded opening cut into the stone, with another smaller opening near the front. Beneath every seat runs flowing water that carries waste into underground sewers. In front of the seats, another narrow stream of fresh water continuously moves along a shallow channel. There are no wooden doors. There are no locked stalls. There are no partitions separating one person from another. Instead, dozens of people may sit shoulder to shoulder discussing politics, business, military campaigns, family matters, or neighborhood gossip, while quietly taking care of one of life's most personal necessities. To a modern visitor, the experience would feel astonishingly public. Privacy simply was not considered essential in the same way we think of it today. Ancient Romans often viewed these communal facilities as another place to socialize, much like visiting public baths or markets. Of course, conversations were only one part of the experience. The smell could be overwhelming. Although flowing water helped remove waste, it could never completely eliminate unpleasant odors. Warm Mediterranean temperatures encouraged bacteria to multiply quickly. The air often carried a heavy mixture of sewage, damp stone, human waste, smoke from nearby cooking fires, and crowded city life. Still, people adapted remarkably well. Ancient noses, became accustomed to scents that would shock many modern travelers. Cleaning oneself afterward presents another fascinating question. Toilet paper had not yet been invented. Instead, many Roman public latrines provided a communal cleaning tool known today as the tersorium. This was typically a natural sea sponge attached to the end of a wooden stick. After use, the sponge would be rinsed in running water, sometimes mixed with vinegar or salt water, before being placed back for the next visitor. Modern audiences usually react with immediate horror. One sponge, many users, day after day. Although vinegar possesses mild disinfecting qualities, historians generally agree that it would not eliminate every dangerous microorganism. People of the ancient world simply accepted health risks that would be considered unacceptable today because they had little alternative. Ironically, despite these limitations, Roman sanitation represented one of the greatest advances of the ancient era. Compared with many neighboring societies, Rome invested enormous resources into moving waste away from populated districts. Massive sewer systems, such as the famous Cloaca Maxima, continued functioning for centuries, carrying wastewater toward the Tiber River. Yet impressive engineering could not completely solve every problem. Rats thrived inside underground tunnels. Insects gathered around damp environments. Parasites spread easily among crowded populations. Medical knowledge remained limited, and many illnesses that we now understand as infections or parasitic diseases puzzled ancient physicians. Imagine sitting quietly in a public latrine while hearing strange noises echo beneath the stone floor. Flowing water gurgles below. Something scratches inside the darkness. Perhaps it is only a rat. Perhaps several rats. Perhaps something else entirely. Ancient writers occasionally warned about snakes emerging through drainage systems. Whether these encounters were common or exceptionally rare remains uncertain. But the fear itself tells us something important. Underground sewer networks were mysterious places filled with creatures rarely seen in daylight. Even the physical design of these toilets created unexpected hazards. The stone seats remained cold during winter mornings. Their surfaces became slippery with moisture. Poor lighting meant visitors sometimes stumbled while entering before sunrise or after sunset. An elderly citizen or injured laborer could easily lose balance. Simple daily routines carried genuine risk. Not every Roman city possessed the same quality of sanitation either. Wealthier urban centers benefited from elaborate infrastructure, while smaller towns often relied upon simpler drainage systems or cesspits that required regular emptying. Outside cities, life looked entirely different. Farmers working distant fields usually relieved themselves wherever practical. Small villages often dug pits some distance from homes to reduce unpleasant smells. Waste occasionally became fertilizer for agriculture, although this practice also contributed to spreading parasites when handled improperly. Meanwhile, wealthy villas demonstrated another side of Roman life. Imagine walking through an elegant countryside estate owned by a prosperous senator. Mosaic floors decorate reception rooms. Marble fountains sparkle beneath sunlight. Servants quietly move between kitchens and gardens, carrying baskets filled with olives, bread, figs, and wine. Hidden behind these luxurious surroundings, carefully designed private toilets connect directly to drainage channels. Unlike public facilities, household latrines offer greater comfort and relative privacy, although servants remain responsible for cleaning them. The contrast between rich and poor appears everywhere. A senator may use a private marble toilet inside his spacious villa. A laborer waits patiently among strangers in a crowded public latrine. A shepherd alone in distant hills simply chooses a quiet place behind rocks. Human biology unites everyone, yet social class shapes almost every detail of daily experience. Interestingly, archaeologists have discovered that many Roman toilets sat surprisingly close to kitchens. To modern readers, this sounds deeply unhygienic. However, ancient builders prioritized practical plumbing over our contemporary understanding of bacteria. Since germ theory would not emerge for nearly 18 centuries, people connected disease with unpleasant air, supernatural influences, or bodily imbalances rather than invisible microorganisms. Cooking fires burned nearby. Meals were prepared. Waste flowed beneath stone floors. Life continued normally. Children grew up considering such arrangements perfectly ordinary because they knew nothing different. As evening approached, another challenge emerged. Many public latrines lacked permanent lighting. Visitors carrying small oil lamps faced flickering shadows dancing across damp stone walls. Every sound seemed louder after dark. Water echoed beneath seats, while footsteps reverberated through narrow corridors. For someone arriving alone late at night, even an ordinary visit could feel strangely unsettling. Yet Rome was only one chapter in humanity's long relationship with sanitation. Far beyond the empire's borders, other civilizations developed remarkably different solutions. Along the fertile Nile, ancient Egyptians adapted to a hotter climate and different landscape. Across the valleys of the Indus civilization, engineers created drainage systems that astonish archaeologists even today. In Bronze Age Crete, palace builders experimented with surprisingly advanced water management. Meanwhile, countless villages across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas continued relying upon methods passed quietly from one generation to the next. Each culture solved the same universal problem in its own way. Some emphasized flowing water, others depended on pits. Some valued privacy, others hardly considered it necessary. The simple act of visiting a toilet reveals extraordinary details about technology, social customs, wealth, religion, health, and everyday survival. Tomorrow's archaeologist might learn as much from an ancient latrine as from a king's palace, because hidden beneath layers of soil, inside forgotten drains, and preserved within abandoned cesspits, lies evidence of what ordinary people actually ate, how they lived, what diseases they carried, and how entire civilizations quietly functioned behind the scenes. And as dawn slowly rises over another ancient landscape beyond Rome, our story prepares to leave the marble seats of the empire behind and travel toward one of history's oldest civilizations, where the search for cleanliness, comfort, and dignity followed a very different path. There, along the life-giving waters of the Nile, the simple question of where to go when nature called reveals another unexpected chapter in the hidden history of everyday life. The Nile had always been the heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Long before the sun climbed high above the desert horizon, fishermen were already pushing their slender boats into the calm morning water, while farmers carried wooden tools toward fields nourished by the river's annual floods. Everything in Egyptian life depended upon the Nile: food, transportation, trade, religion, and surprisingly, even the way people dealt with one of humanity's most ordinary daily necessities. Unlike the crowded streets of Rome, Egyptian settlements varied greatly in size. Some were bustling cities surrounding royal temples, while countless others consisted of quiet farming villages where mud brick houses stood close together beneath the relentless African sun. Every household faced the same unavoidable question each morning, yet the answer depended almost entirely upon wealth, occupation, and location. For the average farming family, there was rarely a separate room designed specifically as a bathroom. Instead, homes were built with practicality in mind. Thick mud brick walls helped keep interiors cool, while flat roofs provided valuable living space during warm evenings. Waste disposal often relied upon simple containers or pits dug at a reasonable distance from living quarters. These methods may sound primitive today, but within their environmental setting, they represented practical solutions developed through centuries of experience. Inside wealthier homes, however, archaeologists have uncovered fascinating evidence of early toilet arrangements. Stone or wooden seats were sometimes placed above containers filled with sand. After use, servants removed the waste and emptied it away from the household before replacing the sand with fresh material. It was not luxurious by modern standards, yet compared with much of the ancient world, it demonstrated careful planning and a growing concern for cleanliness. Imagine being a servant in one of these prosperous households. Before the family awakens, your duties have already begun. Floors must be swept, water jars carried from the river, bread prepared, animals fed. Among these daily responsibilities comes another task rarely mentioned in royal inscriptions or temple carvings: the quiet removal of human waste before the day's heat intensifies its odor. History often celebrates kings, generals, and magnificent monuments. Yet civilizations depended just as much upon invisible workers, whose names were never recorded. Without them, even the grandest palace would quickly become unpleasant to inhabit. The Egyptian climate itself shaped sanitation in unexpected ways. Intense sunlight dried exposed waste rapidly, reducing certain smells more quickly than in cooler regions. At the same time, however, flies flourished wherever organic material accumulated. Ancient Egyptians constantly battled insects attracted by food, livestock, and waste alike. Keeping living areas reasonably clean required daily effort rather than occasional attention. Water played a central role in Egyptian culture. The Nile offered life, but it also demanded caution. Drinking water, washing water, and wastewater often came from closely connected sources. People understood through observation that cleaner water generally produced healthier communities, even if they did not understand microscopic organisms. Religious traditions reinforced frequent washing, linking physical cleanliness with spiritual purity. Priests serving inside temple complexes followed especially strict routines. Before participating in sacred rituals, many washed repeatedly throughout the day. Their concern focused primarily upon ritual purity rather than disease prevention. Yet these customs unintentionally encouraged better hygiene than many neighboring societies. For ordinary villagers, bathing remained a simpler affair. A basin, a jar of water, and a quiet corner often served all practical purposes. Soap, as we know, it did not exist, although mixtures of natural oils, ash, and mineral substances helped remove dirt from skin. Pleasant fragrances made from flowers, herbs, and aromatic resins were highly valued, particularly among wealthier Egyptians who sought relief from the ever-present sense of daily life. Children learned sanitation through observation rather than formal instruction. A young boy accompanying his father into the fields quickly discovered where privacy could be found among reeds or trees. Young girls learned household routines from mothers, older sisters, and grandmothers. Customs passed naturally between generations, becoming so ordinary that nobody considered recording them in official documents. This absence of written detail presents one of archaeology's greatest challenges. Ancient Egyptians filled monuments with stories of victorious pharaohs, successful harvests, and offerings to the gods. Yet they said remarkably little about everyday bodily routines. To understand these forgotten aspects of life, researchers must examine houses, drainage channels, discarded objects, preserved waste, and microscopic evidence hidden beneath centuries of accumulated soil. Remarkably, ancient waste has become one of history's richest archives. Within dried deposits recovered from abandoned settlements, scientists have discovered parasite eggs, fragments of ancient meals, seeds, fish bones, grains, pollen, and countless tiny clues revealing how people lived. A forgotten rubbish pit often tells historians far more about ordinary families than a beautifully carved royal statue ever could. These discoveries reveal that intestinal parasites were widespread throughout ancient Egypt. Roundworms, whipworms, and other unwelcome passengers infected many people, especially where sanitation remained limited. Children were particularly vulnerable. Chronic infections could weaken the body, reduce nutrition, and shorten lives without anyone understanding their true cause. Egyptian physicians did not ignore digestive illness. Medical papyri describe stomach pain, bowel disorders, and various treatments involving herbs, oils, honey, beer, and mineral compounds. Some remedies probably provided genuine relief, while others reflected religious beliefs about unseen forces influencing the body. Medicine and spirituality existed side by side, each attempting to explain suffering through the knowledge available at the time. As the afternoon sun blazed across the desert, another practical problem emerged. Heat accelerated decomposition. Waste left exposed for too long quickly attracted insects and produced overwhelming odors. Removing it promptly became essential, not merely for comfort, but for maintaining the household itself. Even the architecture of Egyptian settlements reflected this reality. Houses were often arranged to encourage airflow, allowing hot air to escape through higher openings, while cooler air entered below. Although builders designed these features mainly to combat oppressive temperatures, better ventilation also reduced unpleasant smells drifting through living spaces. Outside villages, travelers crossing the desert faced entirely different circumstances. Merchants leading camel caravans, soldiers marching between distant forts, and quarry workers cutting stone from remote cliffs possessed no permanent facilities whatsoever. The endless desert itself became their bathroom, offering complete privacy but almost no comfort. Water remained too precious for generous washing, forcing people to conserve every drop. At royal construction sites, including those where massive tombs and temples slowly rose from the landscape, hundreds or even thousands of laborers gathered for months or years. Organizing sanitation for such large workforces required careful planning. Archaeological evidence suggests that designated disposal areas existed away from food preparation and sleeping quarters, demonstrating an understanding based on experience, if not scientific theory, that separating waste from daily life produced healthier conditions. Yet, despite these practical efforts, unpleasant surprises remained common. A careless step near an old disposal pit could send someone slipping into foul-smelling mud. Flies formed dark clouds around neglected refuse. Stray dogs wandered through abandoned waste, searching for scraps. Every civilization, regardless of its achievements, struggled against the simple realities of biology. As evening settled over the Nile Valley, families gathered for bread, vegetables, fish, onions, dates, and beer brewed from grain. conversations turned toward harvests, taxes, temple festivals, and tomorrow's work. Little thought was given to the hidden systems, quietly keeping the community functioning. The removal of waste, the carrying of water, the cleaning of containers, and the maintenance of simple sanitation all happened beyond the center of attention. Perhaps that is why these humble routines fascinate historians today. They remind us that beneath every magnificent civilization stood millions of ordinary people solving ordinary problems every single day. And while Egypt relied upon the rhythm of the Nile and practical household methods, another civilization farther east was quietly developing something even more astonishing. In cities built thousands of years before modern plumbing, carefully planned streets concealed drainage systems so advanced that archaeologists would one day compare them to innovations far ahead of their time. Our journey now follows the ancient trade routes toward the remarkable settlements of the Indus Valley, where the story of the world's earliest urban bathrooms is only beginning. The farther east we travel, the more surprising the story becomes. While many ancient civilizations developed gradually over centuries, the cities of the Indus Valley seem to have appeared with an extraordinary sense of order. Nearly 4,500 years ago, settlements such as Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhalavira, and several others were carefully planned before many famous civilizations elsewhere had even reached their height. Straight streets crossed one another at nearly perfect angles. Neighborhoods followed organized layouts. Brick houses stood in neat rows, and hidden beneath these quiet streets was one of the oldest urban drainage systems humanity had ever created. If an ordinary traveler from ancient Rome could somehow visit Mohenjo-daro around 2500 BCE, one feature would likely astonish him more than the temples or marketplaces. It would not be a palace or an enormous statue. Instead, he might notice something surprisingly familiar, a city where many homes had their own private place for washing and disposing of waste. Imagine entering a modest brick house belonging to a merchant. The doorway opens into a central courtyard where family life unfolds beneath the open sky. Nearby stands a small room with a carefully paved floor. Water poured onto the floor flows toward a covered drain built from baked bricks. Along one wall sits what archaeologists believe was a toilet or latrine, connected through simple channels leading outside. Unlike the communal Roman latrines we visited earlier, these facilities offered something remarkably modern. Privacy, not complete privacy by 21st century standards, but enough to separate one family's sanitation from another's. For many historians, this represents one of the most remarkable achievements of the Indus civilization. No surviving written explanation tells us why these people invested so much effort into drainage. Their writing system remains undeciphered despite decades of research. Countless tiny seals covered with mysterious symbols have been discovered, yet nobody can confidently read their language. As a result, the drains themselves have become one of the civilization's clearest voices. The streets reveal careful planning. The bricks reveal standard measurements. The drains reveal priorities. Someone believed that moving wastewater away from homes mattered enough to organize an entire city around it. Walk through one of these ancient neighborhoods in your imagination. Morning sunlight warms the reddish bricks while artisans prepare pottery, bead makers polish precious stones, and traders arrange goods brought from distant lands. Women grind grain using heavy stone tools. Children chase one another through narrow lanes. Hidden beneath their feet, wastewater quietly flows through covered channels running alongside the streets. Many drains included removable stone or brick covers. Workers could lift these covers to clean accumulated sediment before blockages developed. This detail may seem insignificant, yet it demonstrates long-term planning. Building a drain is one challenge. Designing it so future generations can maintain it is something entirely different. Someone had anticipated maintenance. Someone expected the city to endure. That level of civic organization continues to impress archaeologists today. Of course, these systems were not perfect. Heavy rains occasionally overwhelmed drainage channels. Mud accumulated. Debris blocked narrow passages. Maintenance required constant labor, even if history never recorded the names of those responsible. Imagine beginning work before sunrise, carrying simple wooden tools and baskets. Your responsibility is not constructing temples or carving sculptures. Instead, you inspect drains, remove accumulated dirt, and ensure wastewater continues flowing away from homes. It is difficult work, unpleasant work, yet without it, the city's remarkable sanitation would quickly fail. The invisible workers of history rarely appear in textbooks, but every civilization depended upon them. Archaeologists have also noticed another intriguing pattern. Houses of different sizes often possessed surprisingly similar sanitation features. Wealth certainly existed in the Indus Valley, but compared with several other ancient societies, access to drainage appears relatively widespread. Whether this reflects unusual social equality remains debated, yet the archaeological evidence suggests that sanitation was not reserved exclusively for kings or nobles. That observation raises fascinating questions. Did city leaders consider public health especially important? Did religious beliefs encourage cleanliness? Or were practical environmental concerns enough to motivate these innovations? Without readable written records, certainty remains impossible. The bricks continue keeping their secrets. One of the greatest mysteries concerns human waste itself. Where exactly did it end up after leaving individual homes? Researchers believe some drains emptied into larger municipal channels, while others flowed into soak pits, where liquids gradually filtered into surrounding soil. Certain locations may have required regular emptying by workers, although precise methods remain uncertain. Unlike modern sewer systems carrying everything to centralized treatment plants, ancient drainage relied upon gravity, careful planning, and continuous maintenance. Even so, the achievement remains extraordinary considering its age. Think about the tools available 4,500 years ago. No electric pumps, no steel machinery, no concrete, no computer models, only human experience, mathematical observation, carefully fired bricks, and patient labor. Yet entire neighborhoods functioned successfully for centuries. Daily routines probably began much as they do today. A family wakes before sunrise. Water stored overnight is used for washing. Meals are prepared. Wastewater drains away through channels built into the house. The floor remains relatively dry despite constant household activity. Such ordinary moments rarely appear in dramatic historical paintings. Yet, they reveal far more about civilization than scenes of kings wearing elaborate crowns. Children growing up in these cities would never have realized how unusual their surroundings were. To them, covered drains beneath the streets were simply normal. Private washing areas were ordinary. Brick-lined sanitation channels had always existed. Only by comparing civilizations do we appreciate how innovative these arrangements truly were. Interestingly, archaeologists have found very few monumental royal palaces in the Indus Valley compared with Egypt or Mesopotamia. Instead, much of the surviving architecture emphasizes practical urban planning. Wide streets, reliable drainage, standardized bricks, large public wells, carefully organized neighborhoods. It almost feels as though city planners devoted as much attention to everyday life as to political power. Water itself occupied a central place within these communities. Hundreds of wells have been uncovered across Indus settlements, many located conveniently close to homes. Families could collect relatively fresh water without traveling long distances each day. However, this convenience also required responsibility. Dirty water could not simply be thrown into the street. Doing so would transform orderly neighborhoods into muddy, foul-smelling passages. The drainage network solved that problem. Archaeologists examining ancient deposits inside these channels occasionally recover tiny clues about everyday meals. Fragments of grain, fish bones, fruit seeds, pottery shards, and microscopic plant remains all become accidental messages sent across thousands of years. History often survives through accidents. A broken bowl discarded into a drain, a lost bead washed into a channel, a forgotten cleaning tool buried beneath collapsed bricks. These humble discoveries allow modern researchers to reconstruct daily routines with remarkable detail. Still, even the finest drainage system could not eliminate disease entirely. Parasites remained a persistent challenge. Contaminated food still caused illness. Floods sometimes disrupted sanitation. Animals wandered freely through settlements. Perfect hygiene remained impossible. Yet compared with many contemporary societies, the Indus Valley demonstrates an astonishing awareness that organized cities required organized waste management. As evening approached, merchants closed their workshops, while smoke drifted gently upward from cooking fires. Water continued moving quietly beneath the streets, unseen by nearly everyone walking above. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson these cities teach us. Civilization is often measured by visible monuments, pyramids, temples, palaces, walls. But another measure lies underground. Beneath every successful city exists an invisible network supporting ordinary life. People rarely praise a drain while it works. Only when it fails does everyone notice. The decline of the Indus civilization remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Environmental change, shifting rivers, climate fluctuations, economic transformation, and other factors may all have contributed. As populations gradually dispersed, many carefully maintained drainage systems eventually fell silent. Brick covers collapsed, channels filled with sand, walls crumbled beneath centuries of wind and rain. The flowing water disappeared, leaving only buried foundations waiting to be rediscovered thousands of years later. Modern archaeologists brushing dust from those ancient bricks often pause to admire something profoundly familiar. Despite the immense distance separating our world from theirs, these forgotten engineers wrestled with exactly the same challenge every city still faces today. How do millions of people live together without drowning in their own waste? It is an ancient question. It remains a modern one. And while the people of the Indus Valley quietly mastered urban sanitation long before many others, another civilization to the west approached the same challenge through entirely different customs. Between the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the world's earliest cities first emerged from fertile plains, the inhabitants of Mesopotamia developed their own solutions, some ingenious, some uncomfortable, and some surprisingly familiar to anyone who has ever searched desperately for a little privacy in a crowded city. Between the winding courses of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the landscape looked very different from the fertile Nile or the carefully planned streets of the Indus Valley. Here, in the land historians call Mesopotamia, some of humanity's first cities rose from wide floodplains. Uruk, Nippur, Babylon, and dozens of other settlements became centers of trade, religion, writing, and government. Long before empires stretched across continents, these cities were already crowded with merchants, craftsmen, priests, laborers, and families who faced the same quiet reality every single day. Nature waited for no one. The first light of dawn found bakers kneading dough, while scribes prepared fresh clay tablets for official records. Shepherds drove sheep through city gates, and fishermen returned with their overnight catch. Somewhere inside every neighborhood, people slipped away for a few private moments, though privacy itself remained a luxury that depended greatly upon where they lived. Mesopotamian houses varied enormously. Wealthy merchants often occupied spacious homes built around open courtyards, while poorer families crowded into much smaller structures along narrow streets. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some houses included small toilet areas tucked into corners or beneath stairways. These simple spaces usually consisted of a seat made from baked brick or stone, positioned above a vertical shaft or a clay-lined pit. Gravity did most of the work. Waste dropped into the pit below, where it remained until someone eventually emptied it. There were no flushing mechanisms, no polished porcelain, no scented cleaners, only practical solutions shaped by the materials available thousands of years ago. Imagine entering the home of a prosperous trader in the city of Ur around 2000 BCE. His family deals in wool, grain, and copper brought by caravans crossing distant deserts. The house is comfortable by ancient standards. Thick mud brick walls shield the interior from scorching afternoon heat. A central courtyard admits fresh air while offering a place where children play beneath the watchful eyes of grandparents. Near one corner of the house stands a modest room that visitors rarely notice. Inside sits a brick toilet, carefully constructed above a cesspit. Every few weeks or months, depending upon the size of the household, someone must clean it. Not the owner, not his children, usually a servant or hired laborer, whose contribution to daily life receives almost no mention in surviving written records. Their work began when everyone else hoped to be asleep. Cleaning a cesspit demanded strength, patience, and an unusually strong stomach. Workers lowered buckets into the accumulated waste, slowly removing material that had collected over many weeks. The contents were then carried outside the city or dumped in designated disposal areas. Few occupations earned less admiration. Yet without these laborers, Mesopotamia's growing cities could never have expanded successfully. One forgotten worker cleaning a single household may seem insignificant. Multiply that task by thousands of homes, and an entire hidden workforce suddenly appears beneath history's surface. Curiously, ancient Mesopotamians left behind thousands upon thousands of written clay tablets describing taxes, grain deliveries, business contracts, marriage agreements, court cases, and royal decrees. They carefully recorded the number of sheep owned by a temple, the price of barley, and the wages paid to workers. But they wrote remarkably little about toilets. Perhaps that silence tells us something important. People rarely document the routines they consider ordinary. Nobody writes poetry about taking out the rubbish. Few kings commission monuments celebrating successful sewage disposal. Yet these unnoticed tasks quietly support every civilization. Even religious beliefs influenced sanitation. Mesopotamian cultures often associated purity with proper ritual behavior. Priests entering sacred spaces followed cleansing practices before approaching the gods. Water served not only practical purposes, but symbolic ones as well, washing away ritual impurity before ceremonies. This concern for cleanliness did not arise from scientific knowledge of bacteria. Instead, it reflected spiritual understanding. A clean body honored the gods. A polluted body required purification, though their explanations differed from modern medicine. Some of these customs unintentionally reduced the spread of dirt and contamination. Water itself was precious. Unlike Egypt, where the Nile flowed predictably each year, the rivers of Mesopotamia could behave unpredictably. Floods sometimes arrived with destructive force, sweeping through settlements and damaging homes, fields, and drainage systems. During dry periods, every drop mattered. As a result, households learned to use water carefully. Excessive washing after using the toilet simply was not practical for everyone. Instead, people relied upon small quantities of water, cloths, plant fibers, or other locally available materials, whose exact use remains uncertain because organic objects rarely survive thousands of years underground. The climate created additional challenges. Summer temperatures regularly climbed high enough to make exposed waste decompose rapidly. Odors spread through narrow streets. Flies multiplied wherever refuse accumulated. Dogs wandered freely searching for scraps. Pigs occasionally rooted through discarded rubbish near poorer neighborhoods. Life inside an ancient city was filled with sounds, smells, and sights that modern visitors would likely find overwhelming. Picture yourself walking through Babylon during a warm afternoon. The air carries the scent of freshly baked bread mixed with smoke from cooking fires. Nearby, donkeys pull heavy carts loaded with grain. Metalworkers hammer bronze tools inside open workshops. Perfume sellers burn fragrant resins to attract customers. Yet drifting through everything else is another unmistakable smell. Human waste, animal manure, rotting food, standing water. It is impossible to separate daily life from these realities. People adapted because adaptation was the only option. Archaeologists studying ancient cesspits have uncovered remarkable evidence about Mesopotamian diets. Tiny seeds preserved in ancient waste reveal what families ate throughout different seasons. Fish bones indicate river fishing remained important. Fragments of dates, barley, lentils, onions, and figs appear repeatedly. Even parasites tell stories. Microscopic eggs belonging to intestinal worms survive astonishingly well in certain conditions. By examining ancient deposits, researchers can estimate how widespread these infections were. The results are rarely comforting. Like Egypt and Rome, Mesopotamia struggled constantly with parasitic diseases. Children suffered recurring stomach pain. Adults experienced chronic weakness. Communities accepted illnesses whose true causes remained invisible. Physicians attempted treatment using herbs, oils, minerals, and carefully prepared mixtures. Medical tablets describe symptoms with surprising accuracy, even though explanations often combined practical observation with supernatural beliefs. If someone developed severe abdominal pain, one healer might prescribe herbal medicine. Another might recommend prayers. A third could suggest both. Science and spirituality lived side by side, each seeking answers within the limits of available knowledge. Night brought different concerns. Without modern streetlights, cities became remarkably dark after sunset. Small oil lamps illuminated only a few steps ahead. Anyone leaving home to use an outdoor facility walked carefully across uneven ground. Loose bricks, wandering animals, or open drainage channels presented genuine hazards. An elderly person carrying a clay lamp might move slowly through silent streets, while distant dogs barked somewhere beyond the city wall. Every ordinary task became slightly more difficult in darkness. Privacy itself remained complicated, although household toilets offered greater seclusion than Roman public latrines. Large families often shared limited space. Servants, relatives, children, and guests all lived beneath one roof. Waiting one's turn was entirely normal. Morning routines required patience. Someone always seemed to arrive first. Another knocked softly outside. Life continued according to quiet rhythms, understood by everyone inside the household. Meanwhile, outside the city walls, farmers enjoyed a completely different experience, working vast fields of barley or tending irrigation canals. They simply walked away from cultivated areas whenever necessary. The open countryside provided space unavailable within crowded neighborhoods. Yet even there, practical considerations mattered. Nobody wanted to contaminate irrigation channels, supplying water to crops. Experience gradually taught communities which habits caused problems, even when they could not explain precisely why. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Mesopotamian sanitation is how ordinary it all seems. There were no miraculous inventions, no legendary royal toilets covered in gold, no extravagant engineering rivaling later Roman sewers. Instead, there were thousands of sensible decisions made by ordinary families trying to keep homes reasonably clean under difficult circumstances. History often celebrates extraordinary moments, but civilizations survive because of ordinary ones. Someone empties a pit. Someone repairs a drain. Someone carries water. Someone cleans a floor. Someone teaches a child where to go and how to wash afterward. Generation after generation, These quiet lessons passed unnoticed from parents to children, forming traditions never intended for history books. Yet today, archaeologists patiently reconstruct those forgotten routines from broken bricks, buried pits, and microscopic evidence hidden beneath layers of earth. Each discovery reminds us that ancient people were not so different from ourselves. They laughed with neighbors, complained about unpleasant chores, waited impatiently for someone else to finish, wrinkled their noses at bad smells, searched for a little privacy whenever they could find it. As centuries passed, ideas about sanitation continued evolving across the ancient world. Far to the east, another civilization was developing customs shaped by philosophy, ritual, and an enduring respect for cleanliness. In ancient China, where powerful dynasties governed vast populations and ingenious inventions transformed everyday life. Even the humble bathroom would reveal a remarkable story of innovation, agriculture, and unexpected recycling. One that would connect human waste not only to cities, but also to the food growing in the fields beyond their walls. As our journey continues eastward, the rivers change once again. The broad floodplains of Mesopotamia give way to the mighty Yellow River and the Yangtze, where villages slowly grew into kingdoms and kingdoms, eventually became powerful dynasties. Ancient China stretched across enormous landscapes filled with mountains, forests, fertile plains, and bustling cities. With such a vast population, one challenge quietly followed every generation. How could millions of people dispose of waste without overwhelming the places where they lived? Unlike the monumental stories of emperors and great battles, this question rarely appears in school textbooks. Yet, for ordinary families, it shaped everyday life just as surely as the changing seasons. Picture a peaceful morning during the Han Dynasty, nearly 2,000 years ago. Mist hangs over rice fields while farmers begin their work before the rising sun becomes too intense. Roosters crow from nearby courtyards. Smoke curls upward from kitchen fires where breakfast is already being prepared. Inside a modest wooden house, the family starts another ordinary day. Before anyone eats, before tools are gathered, before children begin their lessons, someone quietly steps outside toward a small structure, standing a short distance from the house. It is simple: wooden walls, a sloping roof, a pit beneath the floor. Nothing luxurious, nothing elaborate, yet unlike many earlier civilizations, the location has been deliberately separated from the family's main living area. This separation was practical. It reduced unpleasant smells. It kept insects farther away from cooking spaces. And perhaps most importantly, it reflected generations of experience, showing that daily comfort improved when waste remained outside the home. Across ancient China, sanitation differed enormously depending upon wealth and geography. A prosperous official living inside a major city enjoyed facilities unimaginable to a poor farming family living high in the mountains. Even so, one remarkable idea gradually became widespread. Human waste was valuable. To modern ears, that sentence may sound surprising, even uncomfortable, but for countless generations across East Asia, waste was viewed not merely as something to discard, but as a resource. Farmers called it night soil. The name itself tells an important story. Collection usually happened before dawn or after sunset, when streets were quieter and fewer people moved about. Workers traveled from house to house, carrying wooden buckets suspended from shoulder poles. They emptied household pits before transporting the contents beyond the city. Their destination was rarely a dumping ground. Instead, much of the material eventually reached nearby farmland. There it became fertilizer. This practice developed for a simple reason. Healthy crops require nutrients. Every harvest removes those nutrients from the soil. Unless something replaces them, farmland gradually becomes less productive. Ancient Chinese farmers understood this through careful observation. Even though they knew nothing about nitrogen, phosphorus, or modern chemistry, generation after generation, experience taught them that certain materials helped crops grow. Human waste became one of those materials. The system created a remarkable cycle. Food left the fields. Families ate the food. Waste returned to the fields. New crops grew. The cycle began again. From a modern environmental perspective, the idea appears surprisingly efficient. From a medical perspective, however, it carried significant risks. Without proper treatment, human waste can contain dangerous parasites and disease-causing organisms. If applied carelessly, it contaminates vegetables, water sources, and soil. Ancient people did not fully understand these invisible dangers. As a result, intestinal infections remained common despite the agricultural benefits. Imagine the daily routine of a night soil collector. The city still sleeps. Only a few lanterns flicker along narrow streets. The air is cool, carrying faint scents of damp earth and extinguished cooking fires. Balanced across sturdy bamboo poles hang heavy wooden buckets. With each careful step, they sway gently from side to side. House after house, alley after alley, every morning follows nearly the same rhythm. The work is exhausting. The smell is constant. Few people greet the collectors with admiration. Many barely notice them at all. Yet the city depends entirely upon their efforts. If they stopped working for only a short time, household pits would overflow. Disease would spread more easily. Daily life would become almost unbearable. History remembers emperors. Cities remember sanitation workers, even if their names have vanished forever. In larger cities during later dynasties, local authorities gradually introduced regulations concerning waste collection and disposal. Officials understood that neglected sanitation encouraged foul smells and public complaints. Their explanations differed from modern public health science, but practical experience repeatedly demonstrated that cleaner streets created healthier communities. Sometimes governments succeeded, sometimes they failed. Rapid population growth often overwhelmed existing systems. Crowded neighborhoods became especially difficult to manage. Small courtyards shared by several families could quickly become unpleasant during hot summer months if waste removal fell behind schedule. Heat transformed every delay into a larger problem. Flies appeared almost immediately. Moisture encouraged decay. The air grew heavy. Residents complained. Collectors worked faster. Then the cycle repeated itself the following day. Ancient Chinese philosophy also influenced attitudes toward cleanliness. Confucian teachings emphasized order, discipline, respect, and proper conduct within society. Although these ideas did not specifically describe bathrooms in great detail, they encouraged maintaining harmonious households where personal behavior reflected broader moral values. Meanwhile, religious traditions connected water with purification. Buddhist monasteries often maintained careful routines of washing and cleanliness. Taoist practices sometimes emphasized harmony between the human body and the natural world. Different beliefs overlapped in subtle ways, encouraging habits that occasionally produced healthier living conditions, even without scientific understanding. Archaeologists excavating ancient Chinese settlements have discovered drainage channels, wells, ceramic pipes, and carefully constructed pits that reveal centuries of experimentation. Not every solution succeeded equally well. Some pits leaked, others collapsed. Floods occasionally contaminated nearby water supplies. Earthquakes damaged underground structures. Communities constantly adapted. Innovation rarely happened all at once. Instead, thousands of small improvements accumulated across generations. Children, of course, experienced these routines differently. A curious young boy might ask why the collectors always arrived before sunrise. His grandfather would simply smile and explain that everyone has work to do. A little girl helping her mother clean the courtyard learned early that keeping living spaces tidy reduced insects during the summer. No formal lessons were necessary. Daily life became the classroom. As they grew older, these habits felt completely natural. Foreign travelers sometimes noticed these differences. Merchants arriving from distant regions occasionally described unfamiliar sanitation customs with surprise or even amusement. Every culture tends to believe its own routines are normal while regarding others as unusual. A Roman visitor might find Chinese fertilizer practices shocking. A Chinese farmer might wonder why Romans preferred crowded communal latrines. An Egyptian laborer could hardly imagine the elaborate drainage beneath Mohenjo-daro. Meanwhile, someone from the Indus Valley might marvel at the enormous populations living inside Chinese cities. Perspective changes everything. One fascinating discovery has emerged from archaeological excavations of ancient latrines across China. Seeds, thousands upon thousands of tiny preserved seeds, some passed naturally through the human digestive system, others arrived accidentally. Together, they reveal forgotten diets with astonishing detail. Researchers identify watermelon seeds, melon seeds, grape seeds, millet, rice, wheat, vegetables, medicinal plants, and even traces of spices traded across enormous distances. Ancient toilets quietly became time capsules. Each layer preserved another season, another harvest, another family meal, another ordinary day that nobody expected future generations to study. The same deposits sometimes contain parasite eggs that remained dormant for thousands of years before scientists examined them beneath microscopes. Whipworms, roundworms, liver flukes, their presence reveals not only illness, but also patterns of agriculture, trade, and travel. In one remarkable case, archaeologists found evidence suggesting that a traveler carried parasites hundreds of miles beyond the region where they normally lived. Without realizing it, an ordinary journey had transported microscopic passengers across ancient China. Even bathrooms preserve stories of exploration. As prosperous dynasties expanded, engineering advanced as well. Some palaces enjoyed sophisticated drainage channels, carrying wastewater away from important buildings. Imperial architects carefully considered comfort for emperors and high-ranking officials. Yet despite these improvements, no ruler escaped the same basic biological needs as the poorest farmer. An emperor wearing robes embroidered with gold still visited the toilet. A palace servant still cleaned afterward. That simple truth quietly levels every social class. Power changes many things. Human nature is not one of them. As the centuries unfolded, Chinese civilization continued refining systems that balanced agriculture, sanitation, and urban life. Some practices would persist well into modern times, demonstrating how remarkably durable practical ideas can become. But while East Asia developed one path, another civilization thousands of miles away approached cleanliness through very different beliefs. Beyond deserts and mountains, across the ancient kingdoms of Persia, and into the world of early Greece, philosophers, physicians, and ordinary citizens all wrestled with familiar questions. How should a healthy person live? What makes a city clean? And what happens when the simple routines everyone depends upon begin to fail? Leaving the fertile plains of East Asia behind, our slow journey follows the old trade routes westward once more. Caravans move steadily across deserts where the horizon seems endless. Camels carry silk, spices, precious stones, and stories from lands separated by thousands of miles. Every traveler worries about water, food, shelter, and the condition of the roads. Yet, there is another concern that no merchant records in his ledger. Where do you go when nature calls after several days, crossing an empty desert? Out here, there are no public latrines, no brick drains, no covered sewers, only sand stretching in every direction. At first glance, the desert seems like the easiest place imaginable. There is endless space, no crowds, and complete privacy. But experienced travelers understood that even the open wilderness demanded careful habits. Camps needed to remain clean. Water sources had to be protected. Nobody wanted waste too close to sleeping areas, cooking fires, or precious wells that might be the only fresh water available for many miles. Life in the ancient Persian world was deeply influenced by this understanding. The vast Persian Empire eventually stretched across enormous territories, linking cultures from Egypt to Central Asia. Such a massive empire contained deserts, mountains, forests, fertile valleys, and busy cities. Sanitation naturally looked different in each region, yet one idea appeared repeatedly within Persian religious tradition. Purity mattered. Followers of the ancient religion, now known as Zoroastrianism, viewed certain natural elements, especially fire, water, and earth, with profound respect. These elements were not simply useful resources. They possessed spiritual significance and were never meant to be deliberately polluted. That belief created an interesting challenge. Human waste was unavoidable. Nature required everyone to produce it, yet allowing it to contaminate clean water or sacred ground was considered deeply undesirable. Religious teachings therefore encouraged careful disposal away from important natural resources. Although practices varied across different periods and regions, the underlying principle remained surprisingly consistent. Protect what gives life. Imagine arriving at a caravan stop after several exhausting days of travel. Dust covers your clothes. Your throat feels dry from desert winds. Pack animals groan with fatigue, while merchants unload bundles of goods beneath the fatting afternoon sun. Before preparing dinner, experienced travelers begin organizing the camp. Cooking areas are chosen carefully. Animals are tethered. Sleeping places are arranged. Only afterward does someone quietly point toward a location some distance away. That direction serves another purpose. Every experienced traveler understands immediately, even without spoken instructions. Everyone knows we're not to contaminate the campsite. Generations of practical experience had taught difficult lessons. One careless decision could attract insects. Another might foul the limited water supply. In isolated places, such mistakes could become genuinely dangerous. Inside Persian cities, conditions naturally differed. Archaeological discoveries suggest that wealthier homes sometimes included simple toilet facilities connected to pits or drainage arrangements resembling those found elsewhere in the ancient world. Construction materials varied according to local resources, but practicality always remained the guiding principle. Luxury appeared in decoration. Necessity appeared in sanitation. The richest noble and the humblest stable worker still depended upon someone maintaining these systems. Servants quietly emptied pits. Laborers repaired drains. Builders replaced damaged bricks. Almost nobody celebrated their work. History rarely applauds maintenance. It simply assumes everything continues functioning. Yet behind every successful city stood countless anonymous workers who spent their lives solving problems most people preferred not to think about. As Persian influence expanded across enormous distances, ideas traveled alongside merchants. Not only silk, not only spices, knowledge, construction techniques, agricultural methods, sanitation practices. A craftsman arriving from Mesopotamia might introduce a different style of drainage. A merchant returning from the Indus Valley could describe covered sewers, unlike anything local builders had previously seen. Civilizations learned from one another far more often than ancient borders suggest. Our journey now reaches the shores of the Aegean Sea, where rocky hills descend toward brilliant blue water. Here, among scattered city-states, rather than one enormous empire, another chapter begins. Ancient Greece is often remembered for philosophy, democracy, mathematics, theater, and the Olympic Games. Bathrooms rarely receive the same attention, yet they reveal just as much about ordinary Greek life. Picture the city of Athens during the 5th century BCE. Narrow streets wind between modest stone houses. Vendors sell olives, fish, cheese, and fresh bread in the bustling marketplace. Philosophers debate justice beneath shaded walkways, while craftsmen hammer bronze, shape pottery, and carve marble. Not far away, hidden inside ordinary homes, families face familiar daily routines. Many Greek houses contained simple latrines placed in relatively secluded corners. Archaeologists have uncovered stone seats positioned above clay pipes or small pits. Waste sometimes flowed into drainage channels, although the sophistication of these systems varied considerably depending upon the wealth of the household and the city itself. Unlike Rome's later communal latrines, many Greek toilets appear to have offered somewhat greater privacy. Not absolute privacy, but enough to allow a person a few quiet moments alone. Perhaps this reflected differences in architecture, perhaps social customs, perhaps simple practicality. Whatever the reason, the archaeological evidence suggests that family-based sanitation remained more common than enormous shared facilities. Water played a central role in Greek daily life. Public fountains supplied drinking water. Bathing facilities existed in many communities. Gymnasiums encouraged washing after exercise. The Greeks admired physical fitness, balance, and moderation. Cleanliness naturally became part of those ideals. Physicians belonging to the tradition associated with Hippocrates began observing how environment influenced health. Although they knew nothing of bacteria or viruses, they carefully noted relationships between climate, water quality, diet, and disease. This represented an important shift. Instead of explaining every illness through supernatural forces alone, some Greek thinkers searched for natural causes. Their conclusions were not always correct. Far from it, yet observation itself became increasingly valuable. A physician might notice that stagnant water seemed associated with sickness. Another observed that overcrowded neighborhoods experienced more illness. Without microscopes, they could not identify invisible organisms. Still, they were asking thoughtful questions, and thoughtful questions often become the first steps toward better answers. Daily life, however, remained stubbornly ordinary. A family woke before sunrise. Breakfast was simple: bread, cheese, olives, perhaps fruit. Children fetched water. Parents prepared for work. Someone inevitably excused themselves for a few private minutes before the day truly began. History moves forward through millions of such unnoticed mornings. One particularly interesting aspect of Greek sanitation involves public baths. While bathing and using the toilet were not always located together, as they later became in many Roman complexes, the broader culture placed considerable value upon washing the body. Athletes especially washed carefully after training. Olive oil covered their skin during exercise. Afterward, they scraped away the oil along with accumulated dust using curved metal tools known as strigils. To modern readers, this may sound unusual, yet it effectively removed much of the dirt collected during physical activity. Soap remained relatively uncommon. Oil often performed much of the cleaning. The scent of olive oil became woven into everyday Greek life. It accompanied meals, religious ceremonies, athletic competitions, and ordinary hygiene. Even so, sanitation problems never disappeared. Summer heat encouraged unpleasant odors. Street animals left waste wherever they wandered. Rain occasionally carried refuse through crowded neighborhoods. Smaller towns lacked the resources available to wealthier cities. As always, prosperity influenced comfort. An affluent citizen enjoyed better facilities than a poor laborer living near the city's edge. Some things never change. Perhaps the most comforting realization emerging from these archaeological discoveries is how familiar ancient people begin to feel. A mother reminds her child to wash. A father complains that the pit needs emptying again. Neighbors discuss unpleasant smells drifting from nearby streets. Builders argue over drainage repairs. City officials debate who should pay for maintenance. These conversations could almost belong to the present day. Human civilization changes dramatically across centuries. Human inconvenience remains remarkably consistent. As philosophers discussed ethics in shaded courtyards and playwrights composed timeless dramas, countless invisible workers quietly hauled waste beyond city walls. Without them, the intellectual brilliance of Greece would have struggled beneath the weight of its own daily refuse. The greatest ideas in history still required someone to clean the toilets. And as Greek influence gradually spread across the Mediterranean, another society would observe, adapt, and eventually expand many of these practical ideas on an unprecedented scale. Long before Rome perfected its famous public latrines, earlier civilizations on the island of Crete had already experimented with sophisticated plumbing that would seem astonishingly modern. There, inside magnificent Bronze Age palaces overlooking the sea, the story of ancient bathrooms takes another unexpected turn, one that begins not with kings, but with running water hidden beneath beautifully painted floors. Long before Roman engineers laid massive sewers beneath crowded streets, and centuries before emperors proudly displayed marble public latrines, another civilization on a rocky island in the eastern Mediterranean was quietly experimenting with ideas that would not become common again for many generations. The island was Crete. Here flourished the civilization historians call the Minoans, named after the legendary King Minos. Around 4,000 years ago, impressive palace complexes stood at Knossos, Phaistos, Malia, and Zakros. Visitors arriving by sea would first notice colorful buildings rising above the hills, their walls decorated with vivid paintings of dolphins, lilies, leaping bulls, and elegant ceremonies. Everything seemed remarkably sophisticated. Wide staircases, multiple stories, large courtyards, storage rooms overflowing with olive oil and grain, and hidden within these beautiful palaces, something equally remarkable: water not merely stored in jars, moving, flowing, directed by careful engineering. Imagine entering the palace of Knossos on a warm spring morning. Servants hurry through long corridors carrying baskets of fresh fruit. Palace officials consult clay records documenting harvests and trade. Skilled craftsmen repair furniture, while musicians prepare for a ceremonial gathering. Few visitors pay attention to what lies beneath the polished floors: clay pipes, stone channels, carefully designed drainage systems. Together, they form one of the oldest known plumbing networks in Europe. Archaeologists studying these structures have been repeatedly astonished by their complexity. Rainwater did not simply collect wherever it happened to fall. Builders deliberately guided it away from important buildings. Wastewater followed planned routes. Certain rooms even possessed arrangements that strongly resemble early flushing toilets. The phrase "flushing toilet" immediately captures attention, It sounds almost too modern, yet the reality deserves careful explanation. These were not porcelain toilets with mechanical handles or water tanks. Instead, they relied upon gravity and manually poured water. A person could empty a container of water into the system, allowing the flowing water to carry waste through carefully constructed drains. Simple, effective, ingenious for a civilization flourishing nearly 2,000 years before the height of Rome. The achievement remains extraordinary. Imagine being a palace servant responsible for maintaining one of these rooms. Every morning begins before sunrise. Fresh water must be carried, channels inspected, any accumulated debris removed before it causes blockages. The work requires attention because flowing water behaves unpredictably. A single obstruction can send dirty water backing into rooms where nobles expect perfect cleanliness. Failure is immediately noticeable. Success goes almost entirely unrecognized. The story repeats itself across history. When sanitation works, people rarely think about it. Only when something smells wrong does everyone suddenly remember its importance. Unlike later Roman public facilities, the plumbing discovered at Knossos appears to have served relatively small numbers of people, mostly members of the palace community. This makes perfect sense. Large public sewer systems demand enormous resources. Royal complexes with concentrated wealth and organized labor often become places where new technologies first appear before spreading gradually to wider society. Whether ordinary farmers living elsewhere on Crete enjoyed similar comforts remains doubtful. Most probably relied upon much simpler methods. As always, wealth shaped daily experience. An official inside Knossos might enjoy flowing water beneath his residence. A shepherd watching goats in the mountains relied entirely upon the surrounding landscape. Civilization often advances unevenly. Luxury arrives first. Practical improvements spread slowly. Some innovations disappear altogether before later generations rediscover them. That seems to have happened after the decline of the Minoan civilization around the middle of the second millennium BCE. A combination of disasters, including earthquakes, political instability, outside influences, and possibly the massive volcanic eruption on nearby Thera, transformed life across the region. Palaces suffered damage, trade networks weakened, populations shifted. The carefully maintained plumbing systems gradually fell into disrepair. Without regular maintenance, even brilliant engineering cannot survive indefinitely. Roots force themselves into cracks. Sediment accumulates. Pipes collapse. Water chooses easier paths. Within only a few decades, an impressive drainage network may become little more than buried rubble. Thousands of years later, archaeologists brushing away layers of earth uncovered these forgotten systems almost by accident. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary clay pipes. Closer examination revealed careful planning, consistent measurements, purposeful slopes, allowing water to flow naturally downhill. Nothing had been built randomly. Someone had calculated these details. Someone understood that water always seeks the lowest point, long before formal engineering textbooks existed. Practical observation taught invaluable lessons. The Minoans learned directly from nature. Watch rain after a storm. Observe where puddles remain. Notice where water flows fastest. Generation after generation, such observations become architecture. One of the most fascinating discoveries concerns the palace bathrooms themselves. Some rooms contain stone basins that scholars believe were used for bathing. Others include drainage channels leading away from washing areas. Imagine finishing a long day's work beneath the Mediterranean sun. Dust covers your skin. Sweat clings to your clothes. You pour cool water over your body inside a carefully designed room where the dirty water disappears beneath the floor instead of collecting around your feet. To us, this seems perfectly ordinary. To many ancient societies, it represented exceptional comfort. Comfort itself carries hidden consequences. The cleaner a palace becomes, the more work someone must perform behind the scenes. Water must be transported, pipes inspected, drains cleaned, leaks repaired. Maintenance never ends. Ancient engineering created not only convenience, but entire professions dedicated to preserving it. The workers who performed these tasks probably understood the plumbing better than anyone else in the palace. They knew which drains clogged after heavy rain, which clay joints leaked, which sections required frequent repairs. Yet history remembers the rulers far more readily than the people who kept their buildings functioning. This pattern repeats again and again throughout our journey. The invisible workers sustain civilization. Another intriguing feature of Minoan architecture is ventilation. Many palace rooms were designed to encourage moving air. Open courtyards, light wells, and carefully positioned windows allowed breezes to circulate through large buildings. The primary goal was comfort during hot summers. An additional benefit was reducing dampness and unpleasant odors. Good ventilation remains one of humanity's oldest allies against stale air. Nobody understood microorganisms. Everyone appreciated fresh breezes. Sometimes practical wisdom arrives long before scientific explanation. Outside the palace walls, life remained considerably simpler. Fishing villages dotted the coastline. Farmers cultivated olives, grapes, barley, and wheat. Goat herds crossed rocky hillsides. Their sanitation methods almost certainly resembled those of countless other rural communities. Distance itself became the solution. Fields, woodlands, quiet hills. Nature provided privacy where cities could not. Yet even rural families developed unwritten rules. Do not foul the stream that supplies drinking water. Keep waste away from food storage. Avoid attracting insects near sleeping places. Nobody needed a written law to understand these principles. Experience served as the teacher. Children watched adults. Adults remembered their parents. Knowledge traveled through habit rather than books. One generation quietly educated the next. Archaeology also reveals another truth often forgotten. Ancient bathrooms rarely existed in isolation. They formed part of larger systems, connecting water supply, drainage, architecture, labor, and social organization. A toilet alone accomplishes very little. It requires clean water, drainage, maintenance, construction, planning. Civilization functions through connections rather than individual inventions. Perhaps that explains why historians increasingly study ordinary infrastructure alongside kings and battles. A broken drain may influence public health more profoundly than a victorious military campaign. A reliable water supply may preserve thousands of lives without appearing in any heroic poem. Quiet achievements often matter most. As evening settles over Bronze Age Crete, lantern light flickers softly against painted palace walls. Somewhere beneath those floors, water continues its slow journey through clay pipes designed by engineers whose names have vanished forever. They could never have imagined that 4,000 years later people would still admire their work, nor could they know that many of their ideas would disappear, only to be reinvented centuries afterward by other civilizations facing exactly the same challenges. Our voyage now leaves the palaces of Crete behind and turns toward a world where communal bathing became almost as important as sanitation itself. In the bustling cities of classical and later Roman society, the line between cleanliness, relaxation, conversation, and public life would blur in ways that seem almost unimaginable today. Before we return to Rome's famous baths, however, we must first understand how the simple act of washing transformed from a private necessity into one of history's greatest daily social rituals. The idea of bathing seems wonderfully simple today. We turn a tap, adjust the temperature, step beneath clean running water, and within minutes, the routine is finished. It is quiet, private, and so familiar that we rarely stop to think about it. For most people in the ancient world, however, bathing was something entirely different. It was an event, a destination, a routine shared with strangers. Sometimes it was a place to relax. Sometimes it was where business agreements began. Sometimes political alliances quietly formed, while steam drifted through enormous halls of stone. To understand bathrooms in ancient times, we cannot ignore the bathhouses, because in many civilizations, the two were closely connected. As the Roman Republic expanded into a vast empire, its cities grew larger than almost anything Europe had seen before. Hundreds of thousands of people crowded inside walls that had never been designed for such enormous populations. Streets echoed with merchants shouting prices, blacksmiths striking glowing iron, children running between carts, and animals hauling heavy loads from dawn until long after sunset. Keeping such cities clean required extraordinary organization. Fresh water flowed into Rome through magnificent aqueducts, stretching for dozens of miles across valleys and hills. These elegant structures have become symbols of Roman engineering, yet their true importance extended far beyond supplying drinking water. They fed fountains, they filled baths, they powered mills, they washed streets, and eventually they helped carry away waste. Without reliable water, Rome's famous public baths could never have existed. Imagine approaching one of these enormous bath complexes shortly after midday. The entrance is busy. Citizens arrive carrying small bundles of clothing. Slaves accompany wealthy families. Soldiers enjoy a rare afternoon away from duty. Travelers stop to rest tired muscles after long journeys. The building itself is immense. High ceilings rise above polished marble floors. Sunlight pours through tall windows. The gentle sound of running water echoes from distant chambers. To modern visitors, it might resemble a combination of a gymnasium, swimming pool, library, meeting hall, and social club. For ancient Romans, that is precisely what it was. Bathing followed a familiar sequence. Visitors first entered changing rooms where clothing was stored. Then came exercise. Many Romans believed that physical activity prepared the body for proper bathing. Wrestling, ball games, stretching, and lightweight training filled open courtyards before anyone entered the heated rooms. Sweat covered the skin. Dust clung to the body. Only then did the real bathing begin. The first warm room gently prepared the body. Heat relaxed tired muscles. Conversations drifted lazily through the air. Friends greeted one another. Business partners discussed shipments arriving from distant provinces. Politicians quietly measured public opinion without standing before formal audiences. The bathhouse became one of the empire's greatest social equalizers. Not completely. The wealthy still enjoyed advantages. But inside these walls, senators and craftsmen often occupied the same pools. A conversation impossible elsewhere could begin naturally here. Interestingly, Romans did not usually wash themselves with soap. Instead, attendants or individuals applied olive oil across the skin. Afterward, they used curved bronze tools called strigils to scrape away the mixture of oil, sweat, dust, and dirt. The process seems unusual to modern minds, yet it worked surprisingly well. The scraping removed much of the accumulated grime without requiring large amounts of soap, which remained relatively uncommon. Imagine standing inside one of these warm rooms. Steam fills the air. Marble columns disappear into gentle mist. Voices echo softly beneath vaulted ceilings. Some visitors discuss military victories. Others complain about taxes. Children laugh while splashing water despite repeated warnings from exhausted parents. Somewhere nearby, an elderly philosopher quietly argues that young people no longer possess proper discipline. Certain conversations never disappear from history. After warming themselves, bathers entered increasingly hotter chambers. The caldarium, the hottest room, challenged even experienced visitors. Heat surrounded the body from every direction. Warm water filled pools, while thick steam settled upon polished walls. Maintaining these temperatures demanded enormous quantities of fuel. Behind the scenes, another invisible army labored continuously. Workers fed wood into giant furnaces. Ash had to be removed. Fire never completely died. The famous Roman heating system, known as the hypocaust, circulated hot air beneath raised floors and inside hollow walls. To visitors, warmth seemed almost magical. To the workers maintaining it, the experience looked very different. Imagine spending your day inside a furnace room beneath the bathhouse. The air is stifling. Smoke stains the walls black. Your hands carry endless bundles of firewood. Every hour, another furnace demands attention. If the fires weaken, hundreds of bathers immediately notice. Complaints begin almost at once. No one thanks the workers when everything functions perfectly. That, once again, is the quiet nature of essential work. After the hottest rooms came cooler pools. The sudden change refreshed both body and mind. Many believed alternating between hot and cold water strengthened health. Modern science continues studying similar ideas today, although ancient explanations naturally differed. Roman physicians connected bathing with balancing the body's internal humors. Healthy living required moderation, exercise, proper diet, regular bathing, fresh air. Their theories were not entirely correct, yet they recognized something important. Cleanliness usually made life more comfortable. Not every bathhouse looked like the magnificent imperial complexes surviving in Rome today. Smaller towns possessed simpler facilities. Military forts along distant frontiers built practical bathhouses for soldiers stationed far from home. Even in remote Britain, Germany, North Africa, and the Middle East, Roman engineers often constructed baths remarkably similar to those found in Italy. A soldier standing beside Hadrian's Wall in cold northern Britain could follow almost the same bathing routine as a merchant living beneath the Mediterranean sun. Empire spread customs as well as armies, yet these impressive buildings created enormous practical challenges. Thousands of visitors used the pools every week. How often was the water changed? The answer remains surprisingly complicated. Some pools enjoyed continuous flows of fresh water. Others changed less frequently than modern visitors would find comfortable. Although Romans valued cleanliness, they did not fully understand how microscopic organisms spread disease. A pool appearing clear to the eye could still contain invisible dangers. Crowded facilities inevitably encouraged the spread of certain infections, skin diseases, eye infections, parasites. The baths promoted cleanliness while simultaneously creating new opportunities for illness. History often advances through such contradictions. One improvement solves a problem while unintentionally creating another. Even the toilets located beside many bathhouses reflected Roman practicality. Visitors often relieved themselves before bathing. Communal latrines connected directly to nearby drainage channels. The same social atmosphere continued there. Friends carried conversations from the pools straight into the latrine without embarrassment. Modern travelers frequently find this difficult to imagine. Today, bathrooms represent privacy. For many Romans, they represented another public space. Children growing up within Roman cities accepted these customs without hesitation. Their first visits to the baths occurred alongside parents or relatives. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Warm rooms, cold pools, shared conversations, marble benches, flowing water, the smell of olive oil, the sound of sandals striking stone floors. Memory begins with familiarity. Nobody questions what has always existed. Outside the grand bath complexes, however, everyday life remained much less elegant. Poor families living in crowded apartment buildings, known as insulae, often lacked convenient washing facilities. Many depended upon public fountains for water. Some visited inexpensive neighborhood baths. Others bathed less frequently than wealthy citizens. Social inequality reached even into matters of hygiene. An emperor might enjoy private bathing suites, decorated with precious marble, imported from distant quarries. A dockworker saved a few small coins to visit a neighborhood bath once or twice each week. Meanwhile, the poorest residents sometimes relied upon nothing more than a bucket of water carried upstairs after a long day's labor. Comfort always had a price. As the Western Roman Empire gradually weakened during later centuries, maintaining these enormous bath complexes became increasingly difficult. Aqueducts required repairs. Fuel grew expensive. Political instability interrupted maintenance. Some baths closed. Others fell into gradual decline. Magnificent pools slowly emptied. Steam no longer drifted beneath elegant ceilings. The furnaces cooled. Marble cracked. Silence replaced laughter. Nature slowly reclaimed buildings that had once welcomed thousands every single day. Centuries later, travelers wandering among the ruins struggled to imagine how alive these places had once been. Yet buried beneath fallen stones remained something far more valuable than architecture. Evidence, fragments of pipes, broken strigils, worn stone floors polished smooth by countless footsteps, coins accidentally dropped beside pools, tiny traces of oils trapped inside ancient drains. Every discovery whispers another piece of an ordinary story, a story not about emperors, not about conquest, but about millions of people simply trying to stay clean, comfortable, and healthy in a complicated world. And while Rome perfected the art of communal bathing, far beyond its frontiers, other cultures were developing entirely different ideas about privacy, cleanliness, and the relationship between sanitation and daily life. Our next destination takes us into the forests, villages, and early medieval settlements of Europe, where the collapse of Roman infrastructure forced ordinary people to reinvent some of the oldest solutions humanity had ever known. When the great cities of the Western Roman Empire gradually faded, they did not disappear overnight. There was no single morning when citizens awoke to find the empire gone. Instead, change arrived quietly. A bridge was no longer repaired. An aqueduct developed a crack that nobody had the resources to fix. A public bath closed for a few weeks, then a few months, and eventually forever. The furnaces cooled. The marble floors gathered dust. Grass began growing between carefully laid stones. Generation after generation, people slowly forgot what these places had once been. For many families living in Europe after the decline of Rome, daily life became much more local. Large cities shrank. Trade routes became less reliable. Communities depended increasingly upon nearby forests, rivers, fields, and the skills of their own neighbors. Without the enormous public works maintained by imperial governments, sanitation naturally changed as well. Imagine waking in a small village somewhere in northern Europe around the 8th century. The air feels cool and damp. Morning mist hangs above nearby fields, while smoke rises gently from thatched cottages. Roosters announce the beginning of another day. A blacksmith is already striking iron. Women carry wooden buckets toward the village well. Children chase geese through muddy paths before being called back by impatient parents. Life moves at a slower pace than it once did inside Rome. So do the solutions to everyday problems. Most houses are built from timber, woven branches, clay, and straw. The floors are packed earth. The roofs are thick with thatch. Separate bathroom buildings are almost unheard of among ordinary villagers. Instead, families usually rely upon simple pits dug some distance from the house, or they walk into nearby woodland whenever privacy is needed. Distance becomes the most important tool. Move far enough from the home. Stay away from the well. Avoid the vegetable garden. Return quietly. The routine is simple because it has to be. Yet even these modest habits require thought. A careless decision can create unpleasant consequences. Waste placed too close to drinking water contaminates it. Waste left beside animal pens attracts flies. Waste scattered near footpaths creates discomfort for everyone. Nobody understands bacteria. Everyone understands bad smells. Experience teaches lessons that science has not yet explained. Imagine a father walking with his young son along the edge of the forest. The boy asks why they always come this far. His father cannot describe microorganisms or groundwater contamination. Instead, he answers with practical wisdom inherited from earlier generations. Because this is where we have always gone. Simple traditions often survive because they work well enough, not because people understand every reason behind them. In villages, almost everything is recycled. Broken wooden tools become firewood. Animal manure fertilizes fields. Kitchen scraps feed pigs or chickens. Very little is wasted. Human waste occasionally joins this cycle. Although practices vary greatly from one region to another. Some communities bury it. Others compost it over long periods. Some simply leave nature to reclaim it. There is no universal method. Europe during the early medieval period is a patchwork of cultures rather than a single civilization. A Saxon village follows different customs than a Frankish town. A Scandinavian settlement develops habits unlike those found in Ireland or Italy. Climate also shapes behavior. In warm southern regions, decomposition happens quickly. Farther north, cold winters slow almost every natural process. Frozen ground introduces entirely new challenges. Imagine living through a harsh winter in Scandinavia. Snow covers the landscape. The ground is frozen as hard as stone. Digging a new pit becomes nearly impossible. Families must rely upon whatever arrangements they prepared before winter arrived. Even a short walk outside becomes an uncomfortable journey through icy wind. Nature has not become any less demanding simply because the weather has changed. The Vikings, remembered today for their remarkable ships and distant voyages, actually placed greater importance on personal grooming than many people realize. Archaeologists have uncovered combs carved from bone, tweezers, ear-cleaning tools, razors, and washing basins at numerous Norse settlements. Medieval writers from other parts of Europe occasionally commented, sometimes with surprise, that Scandinavian men bathed relatively frequently compared with certain neighboring populations. Of course, frequently meant something quite different than it does today. Still, cleanliness held genuine social value. A well-groomed appearance reflected self-respect. Even long voyages across stormy seas did not completely eliminate these habits. Imagine a Viking longship pulled onto a quiet beach after weeks at sea. The crew eagerly searches for fresh water. Some immediately begin cooking. Others repair sails. Several men wash salt from their faces and hands before eating. The opportunity feels refreshing after so many days surrounded by seawater that cannot safely be used for drinking or proper cleaning. Meanwhile, farther south, monasteries quietly become centers of learning and organization. Monks copy manuscripts by candlelight. They cultivate gardens. They care for travelers. They also develop surprisingly practical approaches to sanitation. Many monasteries include carefully planned latrines positioned above flowing streams or drainage channels. Again, gravity performs most of the work. Rows of wooden seats stand above moving water that carries waste away from living quarters. Compared with ordinary villages, these arrangements appear remarkably sophisticated, not because monasteries possess advanced technology, because they possess organization. Hundreds of people living together require careful planning. Rules govern meals. Rules govern prayer. Rules govern sleep. Naturally, rules also govern sanitation. Some monastic communities even assign specific brothers responsibility for cleaning communal facilities. It is humble work, yet within monastic life, humility itself is considered a virtue. No task stands beneath a person dedicated to serving the community. Perhaps that attitude explains why monasteries often remained cleaner than many surrounding settlements. Responsibility belongs to everyone. Archaeologists excavating medieval monastery sites occasionally discover long stone channels beneath former latrine buildings. Centuries of flowing water leave smooth marks upon the stone. Tiny preserved seeds reveal the monk's diet. Parasite eggs reveal recurring health problems. Even abandoned toilets continue teaching historians about ordinary life. One particularly fascinating discovery concerns castle architecture. When people imagine medieval castles, they often picture towering walls, drawbridges, and heavily armored knights. Bathrooms rarely appear in those romantic images, yet castles required them just as much as villages did. The solution became something known as a garderobe. A garderobe was essentially a small room projecting from the outer wall of the castle. Inside sat a wooden or stone seat above a vertical shaft. Waste simply dropped downward, sometimes into a pit, sometimes directly outside the castle wall, occasionally into a moat. The idea was effective. Gravity never demanded wages. Imagine serving as a guard assigned to patrol beneath one of these castle walls. You quickly learn not to linger directly below certain overhanging structures. Experience becomes an excellent teacher. The word garderobe originally referred more broadly to a place for clothing, and some historians believe garments were occasionally stored nearby because fleas disliked the strong smells rising from the shaft below. Whether this practice was widespread remains debated, but it demonstrates how people constantly searched for practical advantages in unexpected places. Even unpleasant spaces could serve multiple purposes. Life inside a castle created unique sanitation challenges. A noble family might number only a few dozen people. During times of war, however, hundreds of soldiers, servants, craftsmen, and refugees could crowd inside the same walls. The existing garderobes suddenly became insufficient. Long waits developed. Pits filled rapidly. Cleaning became far more difficult. Sieges made everything worse. Imagine a castle surrounded by enemy forces for several months. Nobody can safely leave. Supplies grow scarce. Fresh water must be rationed. Waste continues accumulating every single day. Disease often proves more dangerous than enemy arrows. History remembers dramatic battles. It sometimes forgets the slow misery created by overcrowded sanitation. Even kings could not command their bodies to wait until peace returned. Royal chambers contained garderobes much like everyone else's, perhaps decorated more elegantly, perhaps slightly more comfortable, fundamentally the same. Power could purchase luxury. It could not abolish biology. Throughout medieval Europe, one lesson appears repeatedly. Communities that paid attention to clean water generally fared better than those that neglected it. People did not fully understand why. Many believed foul air itself caused disease. Others blamed divine punishment or unfortunate alignments of the stars. Yet practical observation slowly accumulated. Do not drink from stagnant pools if better water exists. Keep animals away from wells. Do not build waste pits uphill from drinking water. These lessons spread through memory rather than scientific textbooks. Grandparents taught grandchildren. Neighbors copied successful habits. Experience quietly became tradition. And while Europe slowly adapted to life after Rome, another part of the world was entering a remarkable period of scientific curiosity and urban growth. Across the great cities of the Islamic Golden Age, engineers, physicians, and scholars would preserve ancient knowledge, improve water systems, and develop new approaches to hygiene that would influence societies for centuries to come. There, the story of ancient bathrooms would enter yet another fascinating chapter, one where faith, science, and practical engineering often worked side by side. Across the deserts, mountains, and fertile valleys stretching from Persia to North Africa, a new era of urban life was beginning. While many parts of Europe were living among the remains of Roman infrastructure, great cities of the Islamic world were growing into centers of knowledge, trade, medicine, and engineering. Places like Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, Cordoba, and many others became among the largest and most sophisticated cities of their time. And within these cities, something that had always shaped human civilization became especially important. Water, not only as a necessity for survival, but as a foundation of cleanliness, comfort, religion, and public life. Imagine walking through Baghdad during the height of the Abbasid Caliphate around the 9th century. The city is alive from sunrise to sunset. Merchants from distant lands fill the markets with silk, spices, metals, and rare books. Scholars gather to discuss mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Craftsmen create beautiful ceramics and intricate metalwork, but beneath this intellectual brilliance lies another achievement that receives far less attention: the organization of daily hygiene. For many people living in Islamic societies, cleanliness was closely connected with religious practice. Ritual washing before prayers, known as wudu, encouraged regular washing of the hands, face, arms, and feet. In addition, larger forms of bathing were practiced when required. These traditions meant that water was not simply something to drink or use occasionally. It became part of everyday life. A visitor entering a medieval Islamic city would likely notice fountains, public water points, bathhouses, and carefully managed water channels. The connection between cleanliness and spirituality created powerful cultural habits. A person preparing for prayer did not simply wash because dirt was unpleasant. Washing carried deeper meaning. It represented preparation, respect, discipline, a connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. This emphasis on cleanliness influenced architecture as well. Many homes were designed around courtyards. Water basins appeared in gardens and entrances. Private washing spaces became increasingly common among wealthy households. Public bathhouses, known as hammams, became important features of urban life. Like Roman baths centuries earlier, hammams were more than places to wash. They were social spaces. A person might visit to clean the body, relax after work, meet friends, or prepare for important occasions. However, Islamic bathhouses developed their own traditions and atmosphere. Imagine entering a medieval hammam. The first room is cooler. Visitors remove clothing and prepare themselves. Then they move gradually into warmer chambers where steam fills the air. Stone floors remain warm beneath bare feet. Water flows from basins. Attendants help visitors wash, massage, and relax. Unlike the enormous Roman imperial baths, many hammams were smaller and more intimate. The experience focused not only on cleanliness, but also on restoration. After exhausting days of work, a visit to the bathhouse offered a rare moment of comfort. For travelers, hammams provided relief after long journeys across dusty roads. For merchants, they became places to recover after weeks of trade. For ordinary workers, they offered access to facilities unavailable inside many homes. Yet, as always, not everyone enjoyed the same level of comfort. A wealthy merchant might have a private washing area inside a large residence. A poor laborer depended upon public facilities. A farmer living far from a city relied upon simple methods near rivers or wells. technology, and wealth determined convenience, the basic human need remained universal. Water management became one of the greatest achievements of many Islamic cities. Engineers studied older systems inherited from Romans, Persians, and earlier civilizations, then adapted them to new environments. Underground channels called qanats carried water across dry landscapes. Well-supplied neighborhoods, aqueducts, and canals supported agriculture. Cisterns collected precious rainfall. In regions where water was scarce, these systems represented survival itself. A broken water channel was not merely an inconvenience. It could threaten an entire community. Imagine a group of engineers inspecting an underground qanat beneath a desert settlement. The tunnel is narrow. The air is heavy. Workers carry lamps while checking for damage. One cracked section could reduce the water supply, reaching hundreds of families. Their work receives little recognition, yet entire cities depend upon their expertise. Again, history reveals the same pattern. The people who maintain essential systems often remain invisible. Another fascinating aspect of medieval Islamic sanitation was the attention given to toilets and waste disposal. Urban houses often included private latrines connected to drainage systems or cesspits. In larger cities, regulations sometimes attempted to control waste disposal because crowded streets created obvious problems. Officials understood that overflowing waste created unpleasant conditions. They did not know about bacteria. They did not understand viruses, but they understood that dirty environments were harmful. Experience had already provided the evidence. Medical scholars of the Islamic world also advanced understanding of health and disease. Physicians studied earlier Greek and Roman medical texts, while adding their own observations. They examined diet, environment, cleanliness, and lifestyle. Scholars such as those in the tradition of Ibn Sina wrote extensively about medicine and the importance of maintaining health. Their explanations still reflected medieval theories, but their careful observation contributed greatly to medical knowledge. The connection between environment and illness became increasingly important. A physician might notice that certain neighborhoods experienced more disease. Another might argue that contaminated surroundings affected human health. Although they lacked modern microbiology, their curiosity pushed medicine forward. Ancient toilets, once again, became unexpected sources of knowledge. Archaeologists studying medieval Islamic settlements have discovered remains of latrines, drainage systems, and waste deposits that reveal details about diet and disease. Seeds found in ancient waste reveal fruits and vegetables consumed by ordinary families. Animal remains show trade networks and eating habits. Parasite evidence reveals health challenges. A simple, forgotten toilet becomes a historical archive. Perhaps the most surprising lesson is that sanitation and civilization have always grown together. Great cities cannot survive without systems that handle the things people prefer not to discuss. Food supply, water supply, waste removal. These are not glamorous achievements. They do not create heroic legends, but they determine whether a city thrives or collapses. Consider Baghdad during its golden age. Poets write verses. Scientists calculate the movement of stars. Translators preserve ancient knowledge. Merchants exchange goods across continents. Yet beneath all this activity, workers quietly clean streets, maintain water channels, and remove waste. Without them, the brilliance above ground would slowly disappear. Daily routines inside medieval homes followed familiar patterns. Families woke, water was collected, meals were prepared, children learned household responsibilities. Someone cleaned, someone carried waste away, someone repaired broken pottery used for storing water. Ordinary life continued through countless small actions. Even palaces followed these rhythms. A caliph surrounded by luxury still required servants to manage water, bathing, and sanitation. The difference was not the need itself, only the comfort available. A ruler might step into a beautifully decorated bath chamber with scented oils and heated floors. A farmer might wash beside a river after finishing work. Both were answering the same human desire: to feel clean, to feel refreshed, to begin again. As centuries passed, these traditions influenced regions far beyond the Islamic world. Travelers carried ideas across borders. Engineers borrowed techniques. Medical writings moved between languages. Knowledge rarely stayed in one place. Every civilization became part of a much larger human conversation. From the Indus Valley drains to Roman baths, from Egyptian washing rituals to Chinese agricultural cycles, from Persian purity traditions to medieval Islamic water systems. Humanity continuously searched for better ways to live alongside its own unavoidable waste. Yet there was still one major transformation ahead. The ancient and medieval worlds had created impressive solutions, but most remained limited by population size, available technology, and incomplete understanding of disease. A new age would eventually arrive when cities grew beyond anything earlier generations had imagined. Crowded streets would become darker, rivers would become polluted, waste would overwhelm old systems, and humanity would finally begin to understand the invisible enemies hiding inside dirty water. The next chapter of the bathroom story would not simply be about comfort anymore. It would become a battle for survival. The next chapter of the bathroom story would not simply be about comfort anymore. It would become a battle for survival. As the world moved toward the modern age, cities expanded faster than anyone could have predicted. Ancient solutions that had worked for villages and smaller towns began struggling under the weight of millions of people. The same streets that once represented human achievement became places where sanitation problems reached terrifying levels. By the beginning of the industrial era, many European cities had transformed dramatically. Factories attracted workers. Population numbers exploded. Buildings rose higher. Neighborhoods became more crowded. But the systems beneath those streets often remained centuries behind. Imagine walking through London during the 19th century. The city is powerful, wealthy, and filled with innovation. Steam engines drive industry. Ships arrive from every corner of the world. Newspapers spread information faster than ever before. Yet beneath this impressive progress exists a hidden crisis. Waste, human waste, animal waste, industrial pollution, all accumulating inside a rapidly growing city. Many homes still lacked proper indoor sanitation. Families living in crowded neighborhoods depended upon shared outdoor facilities or cesspits that were emptied by workers known as night soil collectors. Their job was dangerous and unpleasant. Every night, while most people slept, these workers entered narrow alleys carrying buckets and tools. They removed accumulated waste from crowded homes before morning arrived. The work was essential. The conditions were terrible. Without them, cities would quickly become impossible to live in. But the old systems could no longer keep up. Cesspits overflowed. Waste leaked into streets. Rain carried contamination into rivers. And those rivers were often the same sources people depended upon for water. For centuries, humans had understood that dirty environments were unpleasant. Now cities were discovering something far more frightening. Dirty water could kill. Disease outbreaks spread through crowded urban areas. Cholera became one of the most feared illnesses of the 19th century. Thousands of people could die during a single outbreak. At first, many scientists and doctors still believed in the old idea of miasma, the belief that bad smells and polluted air caused disease. This belief made sense based on experience. Terrible smells often appeared near places where people became sick, but the true cause was hidden, invisible, microscopic. The world was beginning to discover germs. Slowly, through careful observation and scientific research, people realized that contaminated water could carry dangerous organisms from one person to another. This discovery changed everything. Bathrooms were no longer only about comfort. They became part of public health. A toilet connected to a safe sewage system could protect thousands of lives. Clean water could prevent deadly epidemics. Waste removal became recognized as one of the foundations of civilization. Cities began investing in enormous underground networks. Pipes replaced open channels. Sewers expanded beneath streets. Water treatment methods improved. Engineers designed systems capable of supporting populations far larger than ancient builders could have imagined. The transformation was extraordinary. For thousands of years, humans had solved sanitation through local solutions. A household pit, a village field, a city drain, a public latrine, a palace plumbing system. Now entire nations began creating connected networks designed to protect millions of people at once. Yet even this progress did not happen equally everywhere. Around the world, many communities continued using traditional methods because modern infrastructure required enormous resources. Building a sewer system demands money, planning, skilled workers, and political commitment. Some cities developed quickly, others waited decades. Even today, sanitation remains one of humanity's greatest challenges. The history of bathrooms is therefore not only a story about the past, it is also a story about the present. Every time someone turns on a faucet, flushes a toilet, or washes their hands with clean water, they are benefiting from thousands of years of experimentation, mistakes, discoveries, and improvements. A modern bathroom may seem ordinary. A simple room, a few pipes, a stream of clean water. But hidden behind that simplicity is an enormous human achievement. Ancient Egyptians carrying water from the Nile, Indus Valley engineers designing underground drains, Roman workers maintaining aqueducts and sewers, Chinese farmers recycling nutrients back into the soil, Persian travelers protecting precious water sources, Greek thinkers studying the relationship between environment and health, medieval communities adapting after Rome's decline, Islamic engineers developing sophisticated water systems, industrial cities rebuilding sanitation from the ground beneath their streets. Every generation added another piece to the story. The bathroom is not merely a place where humans remove waste. It is a reflection of how societies think. It reveals what people value. It shows how they organize communities. It exposes differences between rich and poor. It demonstrates the relationship between humans and nature. A king and a farmer may have lived completely different lives. One slept inside a palace. The other rested inside a small village home. One ate from golden plates. The other ate from simple wooden bowls. But both faced the same unavoidable reality. Both needed water. Both needed cleanliness. Both needed a solution. That simple truth connects every civilization across time. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about ancient bathrooms is not how strange they seem. It is how familiar they become. A Roman sitting in a public latrine wanted conversation. A medieval villager wanted privacy. A Chinese farmer wanted healthy crops. An Egyptian family wanted a clean home. A Minoan palace worker wanted a working drainage system. A modern person wants a comfortable, private bathroom. The details change. The human desire remains. Comfort health, dignity. For thousands of years, people have searched for better ways to protect these basic needs. And the next time you enter a modern bathroom, remember that you are stepping into the final chapter of a story that began thousands of years ago. A story written not by emperors alone, not by warriors, not by famous inventors, but by ordinary people. The workers who cleaned, the builders who planned, the families who adapted, the communities that learned through experience. Their names are mostly forgotten. Their monuments are rarely visited, yet their contributions surround us every day. Because civilization is not only built with castles, temples, and armies, it is built with invisible systems. Systems carrying water, systems removing waste, systems protecting human life. The history of bathrooms is, in many ways, the history of humanity itself. It tells the story of how people transformed uncomfortable realities into organized solutions, how simple survival became engineering, how necessity became innovation, and how something as ordinary as answering nature's call became one of the greatest challenges and achievements of human civilization. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.